Everybody, and welcome to the Grafton Select Board workshop for November 10th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Just as a preliminary matter, my name is Peter Carlson. I'm chair of the Town of Grafton Select Board. Just permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. So members, when I please call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Fazio?
Fazio here.
Mr. Frisbee?
Frisbee here.
Mr. Often?
Often here.
Ms. Roy?
Roy here.
Peter Carlson is here. For staff that is going to be here, when I please call your name, please answer in the affirmative. Mr. Carter Terenzini?
Present.
Mary Oliver?
Here.
Thank you. So good evening. This open meeting of the Town of Grafton Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's order March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend all public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspended the requirements of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted on the town's website at www.grafton-ma.gov, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment tonight. For this meeting, the Select Board is convening via Zoom meeting, as posted as the town's website identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware of other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided to members of this body are available at the town's website and when final minutes are posted unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I, the chair, will note otherwise. Just some basic ground rules. I, the chair, will introduce each speaker in the agenda this evening. After they conclude their remarks, chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name or by raising your hand to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Also, please remember to mute your computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any reason, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. Finally, each vote this evening, if it were to be taken, will be conducted by roll call. Let's see here. Going down the list, we don't have any public comments this evening. All right. So I just have a couple of quick announcements. So just want to give a COVID update. As of November 10th, there are 173 confirmed positive COVID cases in Grafton. This is an increase of 5 as of today. The town has a green status on the state's COVID map. The state recently released guidance for Thanksgiving gatherings. Please visit the state website for those details, as well as other information regarding the new executive orders that went into effect on Friday, November 6th. This order does include a stay-at-home advisory from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Face masks must be worn in all public spaces, both in and outdoors, regardless of social distancing. Restaurants and all indoor and outdoor facilities must close by 9:30 p.m. Liquor stores and other retail establishments must stop selling liquor at 9:30 p.m. Gathering limits were updated for private spaces to a maximum of 10 people indoors and 25 outdoors. These gatherings must also end by 9:30. I just want to take this moment to thank the many people for their tireless work during the lead up to the actual day of our November 3rd election. The day went seamlessly, and that is thanks to the many poll workers who took on extra shifts and worked the weekends. The National Honor Society, CERT, MRC volunteers who sanitized voting booths, the DPW Municipal Center and school custodians who set up and broke down all of the voting areas, the Grafton Police Department for keeping everyone safe, the Buggy Whip Catering for feeding all of the poll workers and the countless volunteers, the residents who called in offering support and help, and lastly, Paul Cook, our assistant town clerk who stepped up, managed, and oversaw the entire election. We thank you, Paul, very much for doing so. All right, that concludes my announcements. Stepping into the first part of the agenda this evening, we have voluntary tax checkoff charge, and this evening we have Ms. Oliver, our town assessor, here with us tonight. Good evening, Mary. How are you?
Good evening.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just tee this up a touch. We had a draft charge for Mr. Prisby with two parts. One relates to the voluntary checkoff. The second would be to look at additional tax relief that might be proposed for folks in town. I met with Ms. Perkins, who would be a member of the standing committee if the statute's adopted, and Ms. Oliver, who provides a substantial number of opportunities for tax relief at this point in time. What I'd like to do, if I might, we found a couple of things in our brief research. One, that voluntary checkoff is not widely adopted, and it does not appear to raise a substantial amount of money, but nor does it appear to be a substantial difficulty in administering it in any form. It is a statute that must be adopted by the town. That is to say, it would have to be on the annual town meeting warrant and then voted upon before it could be implemented. So you would be looking at fiscal 22 for adoption, then some public relations effort getting it onto the tax forms and the like before you could actually implement it. With your permission, I'd like to have Ms. Oliver speak to the various programs that are currently available and then have the board discuss whether or not it wishes to proceed to place this on the annual town meeting warrant for acceptance. If you agree that that would be a good way to proceed.
All right, thank you. Ms. Oliver?
Thank you. Presently, we have exemption programs for our seniors, our blinds, and our veterans. We do have a 41C, which is for our seniors over 65. Their house has to be their domicile. They've had to own it for at least 5 years or lived in the state of Massachusetts for a minimum of 5 years. They go on income and assets. Right now, we're looking at income for single. If you're single, it's about $24,834 a year, and your assets can't be over $40,000. We have married. Right now, our income is $37,251 with assets of $55,000, and that would be for our 41C. And at this time, we've already increased the base amount to $750, and it originally was $500, and that can go up to $1,000 over time. As the taxes go up, we can give you a little bit more, up to $1,000. We have a 17D, which is also age specific, which is 65, and that goes on your assets only, and that is right now it's at $59,000 and some change. So almost 60,000 for assets, and that would include 401ks, CDs, IRAs, your savings and checkings accounts. We also, with that 17D, that's also for a surviving spouse. So if it doesn't have an age requirement for a surviving spouse, as long as you make that asset, you're under the asset limit. We do have 37A, which is our blind exemption. And basically you apply for that every year as long as you have a certificate from the Blind Association state, and then we qualify for that. And that goes from 500 to 1,000 for our blind. We have many for our 22s, which is our veterans, a 10% disabled veteran up to like a 90% disabled veteran. That goes $400 to $800. Depending, because we do double R's here in the town of Grafton, and not a lot of towns do that. We have gone to the 200%. We have a 22E, which is for our 100% disabled veterans. That's $1,000 to $2,000. We do have a 22D for the surviving spouse of any veteran that has passed due to it with an illness caused from their service or related injury. And that is actually an exemption in full for the surviving spouse, which is really nice. We have deferral programs. We have another one that's an 18, which is a hardship exemption. So anybody, it's not an age requirement. And, assets and income, we take those into consideration. But basically, if, somebody's lost their job or they're disabled or they're really having a tough time for some extraordinary circumstances, whether, it's medical bills or things like that, we present that to the board, we qualify them, and we usually base it on about $500 a year, which is a good help for anybody that, is having a hardship at this time. We do have 2 deferral programs. We have a 41A, which is a program for our seniors. And that basically goes on their income and their assets, and they can choose to defer those taxes, and we can go up to 50% of the value of their home. And it's a great help because now they can defer it. So unless they sell the home or for their demise, it doesn't have to be repaid back until then. And it's only at a 4% interest for them. We have an 18A deferral, which is also like a hardship deferral. So anybody can apply. It's not age specific. And you can defer your taxes for up to 3 years. And then at that point, you would have to start repaying them back, and you can make an agreement with the tax collector on, payment plan to pay that back, and that's at an 8% interest. So, there's many ways that, if there is difficulties, we can kind of assist, our taxpayers, especially, our very vulnerable taxpayers to help them with their payments.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Ms. Oliver to also describe the senior work-off program that is available to folks, when applications for that will become next available, and then we can turn back to the issue of the potential adoption of this statute at the town meeting.
I apologize for that. We do have two work-off programs. We have a senior work-off program and a veterans work-off program. Basically, they can work up to 125 hours a year at minimum wage, and that money comes right off their tax bills for the next year. The program just started. We just collected in all our senior work-offs for our 2021, and they're actually starting already to do the work for next year's senior tax payoff. The veterans program it works the same way, and the only qualification for a veteran would be that they have to be a veteran. It doesn't have to be disabled. They just have to be a veteran. And I've been working with Justin, and if there's any veterans that are interested in doing it, it's the same. It's 125 hours a year at minimum wage, and that will come off their tax bill for next year also. So you would just have to talk with Justin on that. For our seniors, I work closely with Barbara, and there's quite a few departments. I know we use a senior work-off all the time. Board of Health is using one right now, and there's a lot of departments that can use them, whether it's for filing or stuffing envelopes or answering the phone, depending on what the senior is willing to do. Not a lot of them, they don't want to touch the computers and get into that, but it's a great program, and we do have a great response with people working with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to put in the shameless plug for the wide variety of programs that are currently available. I know it's a dizzying array, and we always refer to the statute references, but for anyone out there watching that has interest in either of the work-off programs or the various exemption programs, if they go on to the town's website, www.grafton-ma.gov, and they go to the assessors page, on the left-hand side towards the bottom of the green menu, they're going to see personal tax exemptions. And there's a couple pages there of all these different programs. And I know that Ms. Oliver and her staff would be very responsive to emails and telephone calls. So, Mr. Chair, as I was saying, the best we can sort out is the program voluntary checkoff that I think kind of drove this discussion initially that's on Mr. Prisby's draft, must be adopted at the town meeting. That is step one. We have learned it's not widespread. It has not raised a substantial amount of money, but we've also learned that there's not going to be any substantial amount of money, if any, involved in getting it kick-started. A little bit of effort to help the committee put together some rules and regulations, but Ms. Oliver and Ms. Perkins have kind of been collecting out there what's already there, and probably wouldn't require a great deal of effort to help the committee put that together. But I think the real question for us is whether or not the board wishes to proceed to place this on its warrant for the annual town meeting, and B, its goals list.
I open that up for discussion. I think it's a great question. Does anyone want to go first? Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, since I threw it out there, I'll just address it. I don't operate under any illusions or delusions that this is going to solve poverty in Grafton, nor do I believe that everybody who gets their tax bill is going to be enthusiastic about checking off a voluntary donation to help other people. But I think this sort of falls under the umbrella in public life of any little thing that you can do to move the ball forward just a little bit is helpful. We have not been shy about asking Grafton residents for additional tax funding in the past decade. And I think it would behoove us to explore every avenue possible to defray the cost for people that really are affected. And this is a good opportunity. And thank you, Carter, and thank you, Mary, for going through the programs that we do have that would help people in a situation chronically or because of the current economic crisis where they're having a hard time making ends meet. And there are a lot of instances where people are too proud to ask for assistance. They're not accustomed to asking for assistance, and sometimes they just don't know what is available and they don't have the means to do the research. So I think the more we talk about it, the better. And I think the more options that we have available to people, the better. I'm happy to find out that this isn't going to be particularly, well, it's not going to be costly at all. And again, to the extent that it can help even a little bit, it's worth exploring in my book.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very much in favor of this program, and I want to thank Mr. Prisby for bringing it to our attention, and for Carter and Mary for looking in and providing these details. To me, the substantial amount of assistance is not really an issue for me at all. I think that this is the definition of community in my book. And I think that we don't know, none of us ever know if we're going to face a hardship or not. And this is one of the reasons that I love this community, this town, is because, we have people that are willing to do things like check that box and donate to their neighbors who may be facing hardships for one reason or another. So I think it's a great program, and I'm in support of it. So thank you.
Anybody else? So yeah, I want to say thank you very much, Mr. Prisby, for bringing this forward. I want to thank Carter and Mary for putting together the data here this evening and reviewing what's available today and what are the next steps for us to adopt this. I personally would like to see this put on the annual town meeting warrant for May for final ratification. So, I'm in complete favor of this. Anything we could possibly do to help defray the cost of taxes to people in this town. I'm not going to really repeat. Mr. Prisby covered a lot of that already, but I think this is a great step. Thank you. Crofton?
Yeah, just one last comment. Thanks. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I'm just wondering, I had read about all the personal exemptions at one point, but actually hearing them articulated one after another was really helpful for me to actually understand. I'm just wondering if it wouldn't make sense to just put a video out on basically, Grafton Cable, which articulates all the different criteria and who's eligible and what the amounts are and all that, just so that people will, again, as Mr. Prisby said, the more that we talk about this, the more that we advertise these programs being available, the more people they're going to help. So I'm just wondering if we could do that.
Ms. Oliver.
I did do a program, I believe it was last year, and I did it with Barbara and Justin, the Veterans Administration, and I believe Bob videoed it for us, and we did actually get more people in, whether they qualified or not. They were at least asking questions on how to go about getting this, and I wouldn't have a problem literally doing another video and putting it out there, just if there's somebody that, had any questions or even considered, applying. So the more it gets out there, the better we might have more people come in and take advantage of these programs. So I think it's a great idea. I was going to do it again this year before COVID hit with the seniors. And unfortunately that got canceled. So, the more we can put it out there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good idea. Thank you. Anybody else?
Then, Mr. Chairman, the consensus that I'm hearing is when we discuss goals, I would be adding implementation of this program in FY '22 to your goals list, and I would be putting this into the file as we go to prepare the warrant for the annual town meeting.
Yeah, that would be correct.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. If there isn't any other questions, I think we're all set. Ms. Oliver, thank you very much for coming in tonight and going over that. That was very informative. Look forward to seeing this implemented.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So next up on our agenda this evening, we have final goals for adoption from a couple of workshops. So Carter, you drafted a document for us that we all had.
I did. If we might screen share that, Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, let's see what I can do here.
So what we've done, and you may like this or not, you may choose to follow it in the future or not. Normally we would be about a month earlier, but given COVID and everything else. So the way this works is that we've taken everything you've told us in the first two sessions. Those are the goals down on the left-hand side. They're grouped by sort of what interdisciplinary team they would fall under. We would be adding now formally, we had it on the draft. So we then put in who's the lead party, if there's a cost, and in what fiscal year we would suggest that it be tackled. In this instance, we have hiring a town administrator, hiring a grant or procurement officer, select board adopting formal operating procedures, recruit the revised assistant town administrator. I'll probably change that to the correct title before we submit this for formal adoption, significantly improve public engagement, and so on down the left. You can see who each of the lead party is, whether or not we know of a specific cost and in what years. Once we have that put together, I then met with different department heads if there were any involved. The most involved grouping is in development services. And we met with both Chris McGoldrick and Paul Knoyer, and with Leah and Cameron with respect to the sidewalk program, climate change, and the municipal vulnerability program. In terms of the climate change, then after discussion with Leah and with Chris, we circled back to the primary parties and settled in on suggesting goals for reduction of fuels usage at 6%, which is where you're at right now, about 6.5%, 10%, 15%, and 20% phased in over those years. Those will be subject to competitive grant applications in order to have monies to implement them, or in savings that are being realized, such as in the plan that Superintendent Cummings has put together. Once you're at that point, Leah's suggestion is we then get everybody back in, do another energy audit, identify other opportunities, and take it from there. For instance, I stepped out of the office today and I noticed that the hall lights were on all the way down the hall. I'm used to buildings where, you know, they're set up in like banks of 4, and as you walk through, they kind of tell where you are and they turn them on or turn them off. Those are the kinds of things that a subsequent audit and an implementation grant can do for you. You can't do right now. The Municipal Vulnerability Program, you did the original $15,000, give or take, study in conjunction with 2 other communities. I believe it was Sutton and Millbury. I may be off base on that. Ms. DeFazio might know who those other 2 communities were. And the bottom line here is that it kind of got parked off to the side. There was an application, but it's really not in anybody's remit right now. And I don't think any department understands that it's important to the select board. And so the other thing that this set of goals does is I then get to hand it to departments to say, this is what's important to the select board, and when and how are you going to work upon these things. And that was kind of similar to the sidewalk program. After meeting with Mr. Knoyer and Mr. McGoldrick, I discovered there actually was a pretty good head start variety of material and where are the sidewalks, what's the condition of the sidewalks. But in discussing it with Mr. Knoyer, the question became, well, but yeah, is this really a goal? How important is this? Because there'd been a proposal for, and I can't remember the name of the street, but nobody wanted to go forward with it. So again, if it's on your goals, if you've identified it's important to you, that says to the department, this is important. This is a goal. This is what the select board wants you to spend some time and energy on accomplishing. Now, the interesting thing about the climate change, municipal vulnerability program, and the sidewalk program, as I talked with Mr. McGoldrick and with Ms. Cameron and with Mr. Knoyer, you know, some of the questions became, okay, so there's lots going on in your departments right now. How can we find the extra time to get this done? And that is when Mr. McGoldrick and Ms. Cameron both said, we really have got to find a way to get this electronic permit filing in place. That's gonna provide us with we think some time to tackle these extra programs. In terms of funding for the sidewalk program, annually you get not a substantial amount of money, but there is the so-called Uber and Lyft money. For every pickup that is done in your community, there's a 20-cent fee that goes to the state. And they then send half of that to you, which can be used for basically complete streets type. They can be used for road work improvements that are consistent with the Complete Streets program. They can also be used for sidewalks and other types of improvements. It's not a huge amount of money. It's about $3,000 a year at this point. It may pick up as we shift in some areas from vehicle ownership to more sort of, I'll grab a ride to the T station and then I take my ride into Boston. So this is what we've been through. This is what we've developed. This is the years we've put in, sort of the challenge, if you will, in finding time and development service to work on these things. I would need your feedback so I can fine tune this, change this. The idea is that if you're finding it approaching agreeable, we would put it on your agenda for the 17th of November for final adoption. We then circulate that out to the departments And Mr. Chairman, I sent you a document with some page numbers. I don't know if you were able to set those up at all.
Um,
I don't think it's that important if you weren't.
I think which memo, you sent me a few things, Carter.
Yeah, it was the email that had 2 documents and said, can you set these up?
Yes, the budget books here and.
Yeah, yep. If any one of those 3 page numbers we could put up, it would show how this works in practice.
Right. Is this it right here?
Yep. I think the first page number was maybe 43 perhaps. So each department in this other community annually reports with their budget what they accomplished in the prior fiscal year, what they're currently working on, and what their goals are for fiscal 21. So in this instance, the select board, in preparation for the fiscal 21 budget, said that they wanted to develop a business continuity plan. What happens in the community if something catastrophic happens, and also a written fraud policy. This had come out of their audit. I don't think we need to go through the other ones, Mr. Chairman. I think that kind of gives the example. So in this case, the department, the town administrator, takes those goals, which are on that 11 by 17 Excel spreadsheet, and they look what the board has said it wants accomplished, and it figures out how to get it into its work plan for the coming year, because this work plan sends that clear signal. Now, the department head may come back and say, okay, guys, this was really nice, but I can't get this done in this fiscal year, or I can't get it done because of this, or when they tell you what it really need for money to get it done, there's sort of a whoa, let's back up, let's rethink this. So happy to answer any questions. I think you'll see everything that came out of the 2 retreats on here, how this works in practice, getting crunched into the department's budgets, and how it sets the path forward. And obviously, every year, select board goes through this process again, and you're the boss. So you get the right to change your mind. And say, well, yes, that's what that board wanted to do in fiscal 23, Mr. Administrator or Ms. Administrator. But now that we're sitting in this retreat and we see where we're at, we've changed focus a little bit, and we want to do this. So it becomes the annual part of setting the budget, which is, as I've mentioned before, I think the largest policy document of the year. I think I've prattled on more than I should have, but happy to answer questions in any fashion.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Carter. This is a great list, and to my knowledge, covers everything that we discussed in a really easy to understand order too. I like how its goals are broken down into different departments and timelines and cost. I have a question. First, going back to the administration and finance list, you mentioned we're going to revise the assistant town administrator position based on the current vote of the board. And it says right underneath that, significantly improve public engagement, which is also a goal of this board. And I'm just confused under, is that going to be wrapped into one goal now, since we've sort of made that a priority in this position, or are those 2 separate line items?
I think we could probably do it as a single item: recruit management analyst and communications specialist. I think we call it to significantly improve public engagement. I think that's the way that might reflect it best. and make it clear that let me just think about that for a moment, because significantly improving public engagement, yes, the communication specialist is intended to be the public engagement officer, sort of the cheerleader, the driving force, if you will. But that does cover everyone. Let me just think about the best way to reflect that, if I might.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a couple other clarifications too. So as we get down into development services, and you talked about climate change planning and then municipal vulnerability program, and to make this a little less confusing, because they sound like the same thing. So the climate change planning is actually called the Green Communities Program, which is which is probably a better way to state it here. Grafton is part of this Green Communities Program, and just to give the rest of the board and the public a little information on that, we became a green community in, I believe, 2018, and that's how we funded our LED streetlights. And we qualify for $250,000 every grant cycle, which comes annually. And I had recently watched the CIPC and school committee meeting last week, and all of the items, or most of the items at least, on the train proposal could be paid for. So capital items could be paid for from this Green Communities grant. So for me, when we talk about priorities, and I'm speaking for myself, of course, I think that if we have the opportunity to knock out capital items, receive $250,000 from the state, that does become a priority for this department. And if we run into real crunches with staff, there are opportunities for, just to call in a contractor or consultant to come in just to do this one application. There are ways to do it, but I find it's important, because in order to stay a green community and continue getting this funding source, we have to, our reduction has to be 20% within a 5-year period. And the baseline year was 2018. So, although I think that writing it out 6, 10, 15, and 20 is a good goal, I think we can actually beat that within the 5-year time frame and continue to receive grant funding. So part of it is the fact that we're helping the environment, but another piece of this is that we're also receiving state funding and grant funding. And so that's why I had put it as one of my priority items. And then getting into the municipal vulnerability program, that's actually called the Climate Change Resiliency Plan. Again, another opportunity to that the state provides grant funding for action items based on this report. So, and I believe that the town of Grafton did this grant report with Northbridge and Millbury. It was not Sutton.
Yeah, Millbury, I knew was right. Thank you.
Yeah, Millbury and Northbridge. So, and again, I'm happy to look into this too, but I know from this being in my wheelhouse that these are two opportunities for us to assist in, further needs that we have in this town, particularly with capital, and receive quite a number of grant funding each year. So I think it would be important to keep on the priority list.
Mr. Fazio, I think maybe as a follow-up to that, maybe in a future agenda item, maybe you can put some details together for the board to consider and evaluate, and just take a little bit deeper dive into what exactly those grants do for us compared to what some of these projects are in the development services. Do you think that's something you'd be willing to do?
I'm happy to do that. And Leah Cameron, who works in Concom too, or for conservation, I should say, she's also, we could probably have her on the call as well, since she's the the staff member who does it for Grafton. You know, I certainly don't want to overstep her role in any way if her experiences are different than mine, but I'd be happy to do that. I've been doing these programs now for about a decade since they began. And, you know, many of you know, I work for the town of Sutton, but I'm also a consultant for many other communities within Massachusetts, which obviously would be a conflict of interest for Grafton, but as a select board member, as a volunteer, you know, I can help. I will be happy to help out in any way I can.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, we could change climate change planning to green communities implementation. That's a little bit clearer. And we could change the municipal vulnerability program to climate change resiliency plan implementation, parentheses MVP. So the first program is kind of to try to reduce, slow, lessen climate change. The second program is to deal with the impacts of it, if you will, as a division. One challenge, and Ms. DeFazio will know this better than I, but it's my understanding that when you compete in a given year, you also have to completed your project if you're successful in getting that grant before you can then apply in the next year. Is that my understanding? Is there's some timing issues involved?
It is, yes. So I typically, in order to make sure that I am not losing a grant application, I actually start my planning phase before I even apply for the grant. And so I have everything lined up that when I get that grant award, people are hitting the ground. And so, and that's the way to do it. And many communities don't do it that way.
Yep.
And they wait a 2-year cycle. But because we've been able to do that, like in particular in Sutton, we are hitting a 35 to 37% reduction rate. So think of that reduction rate in terms of finance compared to 6% in energy cost savings. So, you know, it makes a significant difference, and it only takes a couple of years to get there.
Makes sense. Would you like to see, would those two changes be more reflective, you think, for folks who would be using this? If we change
Definitely
the
for me, but
titles?
real quick before we go to that, Ms. Roy, did you have a question?
I don't know if this is too personal, but Doreen, what is your actual title in Sutton, and who's the equivalent to that in Grafton, so that they can have all the projects lined up and ready to go and stay on top of all of this?
It's not too personal a question, Colleen. So I used to be the sustainability director for the town of Sutton for several years. And I actually left that position earlier this year and started my own LLC. So I'm working for several communities now, and Sutton is now my client, actually. So I ran a department of one, and it started off just doing green communities, and it grew to many other type of programs and projects that grew under that position. That as these programs grow in the state, lots of cities and towns around the Commonwealth have this need. And what I found in getting into the consulting business is that there are several cities and towns like Grafton that do not have the funding to have a position like this. They're usually positions that are squeezed out of other departments that don't have a lot of time. And that's why I said I'm not the only game in town as far as contractors. I could probably be able to assist in finding, if we needed to, some kind of project manager just to hire to do this project, if we couldn't find someone internally to take on this program. And again, receiving $250,000 or sometimes between the two projects up to $500,000 worth of grant funding is worth it for a community to spend a little bit of money to get these projects done. So I would say, in my experience, it usually comes out of planning, like an assistant planner would do something like this, or conservation would do something like this. So this is not unusual for Grafton to be doing this. I think in Sutton, we had a sustainability director position created because the town manager feels very strongly about sustainability and climate change planning as a goal of his own. And so that position came to fruition that way. And the board supported it because year after year, they kept seeing, they called me the person who delivered money, which was a nice role to have every time I showed up. So, so even if they weren't exactly environmentally friendly, I was the person who was always telling them the money I was getting for them. So I would just like to see, from my experience, it would be nice to see Grafton follow suit and take advantage of some of these programs. And like I said, I'm willing to help in any way I can.
Thanks. All right, so before we get to anything else, so Carter, you're suggesting changing climate change planning to, what was that again, in the municipal?
Green communities implementation and changing municipal vulnerability program to climate change resiliency plan implementation, parentheses MVP. I'm wondering if Ms. DeFazio thinks that would be more reflective and better better understood by folks who pick this thing up and look at it.
I think so. That's what it's called in other communities. So that would be more clear.
Rest of the board okay with that? We're just changing the title. Okay. Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you. Any other questions? So I know we touched upon development services in those areas. Thanks, Doreen, for that insight into that. Is there any other questions with regards to, yes, Mr. Often?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to lean on some of the more experienced members of the board. You guys went through this last year. Does this feel like a more implementable plan than we had? I know you guys mentioned in our original workshop that we had some issues with just putting too much on there and not being able to sort of follow through with it. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Does this seem more reasonable and implementable? And then, how do we keep this in the forefront so that we carry through with these goals?
Anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it does seem more reasonable. I think what we did last year was we had sort of 5 individual sets of goals that we agreed on, and we left it up to each person to follow through on their end and sort of report as the year went along. This seems more like, a more collaborative effort with definable action items. So, for instance, we're going to improve communication with the community. We're hiring somebody who's going to spearhead that campaign. It doesn't mean that, we're not individually still responsible for that. And I think at some point we should revisit that issue, perhaps when we do have this person on board, to discuss amongst the group with the aid of a professional about how best to do that. For instance, Peter sent out a nice memo today, and I know that a lot of people are online, so I think the more we discuss these things, the better. But I do think this is a more manageable list, and I'm excited about portions of it, particularly with the communication and with the sidewalks. I think there are people for years that have been waiting for the sidewalks. And just to say, to the extent that there are department heads who are seeing things on these goals that might have been addressed in the past, just remember, it's a different board, and there are people with different priorities, and I can imagine that would be frustrating when board members do come and go, but it sort of is what it is. And also things change over a period of years, and sometimes initiatives are revisited. So yeah, this is a good plan.
Great. Any other input or comments? Mr. Fazio?
I agree with all that. I just want to add that the suggestion that maybe we as a board take responsibility for keeping track of this too, by maybe similar to Ms. Roy's idea of, at the end of every agenda, having a list of items that we plan on, whether it's every 4 or 5 weeks, having this goal list brought up back in front of us. So we're focused on what our goals are.
Any other questions, Mr. Often?
Yeah, another thing that may help a little bit is I know, so sidewalks wasn't something that I kind of came in. Certainly support a sidewalk program, but that might not necessarily be something that would be a focus of mine. One of the things that we could do in addition to sort of agreeing that we're all gonna kind of approach this from a teamwork standpoint is to kind of appoint champions almost to each of these, so that we have some individuals that really are focused on making sure that we're carrying those particular aspects that they're passionate about forward. Is another idea to kind of, in addition to see this regularly, to have some more accountability on an individual basis to say, let's take the things that we're really, so that might be another way to tackle this and just keep focus on it, I guess, because then everybody will feel a sense of responsibility for, the things that they're championing.
Okay. Any other questions? So I do like the idea of having some sort of mechanism to just remind us, that way, as we're drafting our agendas, especially on my end, and I'm looking at where these goals are and how they're coming up. I think it's a great tool to have. I'm wondering if the board is in agreement that maybe once a month, one meeting out of the month that we reserve and just go through and get updates on these, or as things need action, obviously we'll bring them into the forefront of the agenda. If there's any action by the board, then we'll take it on those individual, but gives us an opportunity once a month to just kind of review and just kind of see where things are. I don't imagine doing this every other week, reviewing all of the goals would be, my estimation, a good use of the time. I think we need time between meetings for things to develop and then have some sort of measurable accomplishment between the meetings. So I didn't know how the rest of the board felt. To Mr. Faggio's point, to Ms. Roy's idea about doing that once a month. All right. 3, 4. Oh, look at that. Getting good at the sign language. All right, good. All right. Mr. Terenzini, is there anything else?
No, if there's a consensus that I'm sensing based upon the few changes we've talked about here, we're just, last minute checking on typing and spacing and so on and so forth. We'll get this onto your agenda of the 17th of this month for formal adoption. I can then circulate it out to the department heads. As I say, we're about a month behind where you would normally be, but I think that it's still, and that's only because of your accelerated budget planning. And then the department heads will have it. They'll see what your intent is, and they will understand that these are your goals, and it's be a vote. And they'll have the signed copy approved by a vote of X to Y with the chairman's signature, and there won't be any confusion as to did they really want to make that happen or not.
All right, Mr. Often.
Yeah, just one last thing on that. I love this, Carter. Thanks so much. This was a very worthwhile, valuable process to go through to clarify what it is that we want to get done. Once we've signed off on this, I'd like to see if we're trying to introduce sort of major initiatives that are outside this list of objectives. For me, I'd like to see some pushback to say, you guys didn't ask us to do this. This wasn't on our priority list. This is not what we were focused on. So for me, I would like to see some agreement if we're going to make any substantial changes to this within the year, that we agree as a board that we're going to onboard something else and potentially have to let go of something else.
We always do a reevaluation when it comes up. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Anything else? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Terenzini, for putting this together. I too appreciate the process and how we got to this. It's very helpful, a high-level document. I'm looking forward to next week and consider adoption. Thank you. All right, moving on to FY22 revenue projections for adoption. So is there a memo that you want me to bring up first?
Yeah, the standalone spreadsheet, I think will be just fine. I sent out the live document today, but I'm not sure that we need that up on the screen. The one that I used, it should be in your board packet.
1 second here.
You're probably gonna have to rotate it once you get it up.
Yeah, 1 second here. Try that again. And is this the one right here?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So this is the document that I presented to the TRICOM just last week. We're not looking for any immediate action upon it. You have a standalone memo that explains the rationale behind each of these numbers and the assumption that we've made on state revenues. And all I can say is that I wish every one of these vaccines and therapies that have been announced within the last 3 days, speedy implementation and deployment so that my assumption COVID is done by June 30, 21 can come to fruition, not only for the town's economics, but for my reputation as a soothsayer and the benefit of all the folks who have had to deal with this deadly disease. You also have the live file. Please feel free to wander through it if I've made a mistake in any of the calculations based upon the way that we presented it to you. Do please feel free to bring those to our attention. Or if you want to do any what ifs, what if this happens? What if that happened? You can play with, I don't want to say play with this, but you can work with this document. I will present to the Finance Committee on November 19 to answer any questions that they might have. I'm hopeful that I could get any questions from them that evening. I did provide them with all the documents today as well. And I'm hopeful I can get any questions from you all by 20 November. That will allow me to make any adjustments to this document, to respond to questions, make any adjustments to this document. And I would then present it to you on 1 December for adoption. Once adopted, this revenue figure would then guide our preparation of a budget. If we have, let's say, 67,529, 944 in revenue, we'll back out the overlay, we'll back out some other things, and we know what we have left to spend. Happy to answer any questions that may have come up since Thursday night as you kind of looked at it or thought about that presentation. Please, any questions between now and, as I say, 20 November would be very helpful to give me a chance to respond to you. And of course, any questions that might have come up here tonight. And again, this is a process I follow. If you don't like it, by all means say, nope, nice effort. You didn't get the ball across the goal line here, Carter. We have a different method we'd like you to use. Whatever sense of direction you want to give me here.
Carter, I'll be first to say, I appreciate you sending the spreadsheet over like this and allowing us to kind of put in the what if scenarios. I think that's helpful for me personally to get a better idea over the town's financing. So I want to say, I like it. A great start. I'm looking forward to this. Ms. Roy, you had a question. Sorry, I cut you off.
Nope, not a question. That's the direction I was going to give Carter when he was asking for directions. I really appreciate getting the information ahead of time. I really appreciate him soliciting questions from us. It's just refreshing.
Any other comments or questions with regards to FY22 projections? Mr. Frisbee?
Yeah, just really quickly. So I just want to talk about process on how we're going to go through these. So we're going to have our questions to you on this by November 20th, which let me look for my calendar here. So 10 days from now, a week from Friday, and then you're going to present this to us on Tuesday the 1st. And at that point, either our questions will have been answered, or you'll have the opportunity to go through with a presentation of this and take questions, or maybe answer some questions publicly.
Yeah, so I'll have questions, hopefully from the Finance Committee the night of the 19th.
Okay.
Questions from you by the 20th. I'll kind of package that up. The following week is a bit abbreviated, but it's my intent to, over the weekend, try to respond to the questions that both bodies have and make adjustments if they seem warranted, put together a memo of what those questions were and how I responded to them, adjusted, and then give you that package for 1 December. If you're still not satisfied, if you have additional questions, simply table it till 15 December, I believe, would be your next business meeting. But during the month of December, for sure, I'd like to try to get a consensus on a number, because that's what drives the expenditure. You know, I have a very simple Excel spreadsheet. Here's my revenues minus my overlay surplus, minus this is what I can spend. And when the budgets put that number in deficit, something has to be cut. It's just that straightforward.
Can I ask, are we expecting any changes in projections for state revenue between now and December 15th?
I don't know. You know, so the governor submitted a revised House 1. The House has added about $256 million to his House 1, as I recall it. I think they were mostly on the state education side. I have to go back in and do a deeper dive on that. I didn't get a chance to do that this week. And if the House moves the budget over to the Senate, I mean, the basic assumption that I've made in these numbers is that the FY22 state aid will be equivalent to the FY21 state aid flat. I'm sorry, I just can't give you a better answer than that right now.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to ask a question. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on the projections? Okay. Thank you, Carter, very much for putting this together. All right, if you got your questions, get them in and get them answered, and we'll be talking about this in a couple of weeks. Thank you. All right, so next up on the agenda here, I've got Land Management Committee. Carter, did you want to lead us off with this one?
I spent quite a bit of time with Mr. Robbins today. Got a much more detailed explanation of what he was looking to accomplish. This is driven to a large degree by his work on trying to create an inventory of lands that are dedicated to open spaces as part of the open space plan. He recognized that this might not need to be a long-term committee. Essentially, it might not need to be permanent committee. Essentially, what he was looking for was some assistance, I think, more than anything else. So what he and I talked about today was that I would put together a memorandum of everything we discussed, which included him possibly identifying some very specific tasks, which some staff, whether they be an intern or you know, adding some hours to somebody. So it's things like geez, could somebody go into the vault and find all the minutes of the former land use committee back in the, I think it's late 80s? Get those scanned so I can understand everything. Geez, there's a forestry committee referred to on a number of these parcels of land. Can I try to get some information to figure out what happened to the forestry committee and where did it go? And geez, there's a number of town meeting articles I'd really like to get copies of. And so I think that we can provide him with a substantial assistance that would move him towards where he needs to be. So I would ask for your indulgence for about another 10 days for me to put that memorandum together and circle back to him so that he can agree, you know, yeah, here's a couple of very specific things that if you guys could do that for me, it would help really move this thing along. I think that would satisfy him, not necessarily require a complete new committee that would have to be staffed up and have meetings and move the project along.
Any questions? Comments? Carter, I noticed you put your hand up in the Zoom meeting. Did you need me to lower that for you, or are you all set?
I'm all set. Sorry about that.
It's okay. All right. Any questions or comments? So potentially we can bring this back here earliest December 1st, Carter? Is that-
Your first workshop in December, or your workshop in December. Sure.
Be the 8th. That would be the first workshop, right?
Yep.
Mhm. Okay. No one has anything else on that? Thanks, Carter, for putting that together. So next
We're
up-
probably, I'm sorry, we're probably going to be able to give you a brief before the 8th, but for public, yes, the 8th.
And I guess coming up next year, we have solid waste contracts. So you've got three exhibits attached here within the packet of information. Did you want to lead us off with this?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. You have 3 contracts. One expires on June 30 of 2021. That is for the collection of waste. You then have a contract that expires approximately 5.5 years later on December 31 of 2026. I haven't worked out completely the relationship between contract A and contract B. Contract A appears to be we'll collect the stuff at the curbside. Contract B appears to be, and then we'll haul it over to Wheelabrator. Yet you pay as if it's one single contract. Contract C is a disposal with Waste Management Incorporated, and that ends on 2 years after contract B on December 31 of 2028. Contract B and contract C are essentially what we call put or pay contracts. And for anyone who doesn't necessarily know what that means, think of it this way. You are reserving space at Wheelabrator. They have to take this amount of waste from you. And when waste plants were first firing up, one of the fears of the investors was, okay, so we're going to lend you, whether it was Vicon, Wheelabrator, or some of the others, $40 million to build this plant. What happens if none of these towns ever deliver waste? How do we get our money back out of this thing? And so these contracts, industry-wide, are essentially structured as put or pay. Put the waste on our tipping room floor and pay us for it, or pay us what you contracted to deliver. There is no cancellation clause for a lack of appropriation. And neither of these contracts are enforceable under Massachusetts law. they are enforceable under New Hampshire and New York law, which wouldn't necessarily recognize a lack of appropriation, nor would they necessarily recognize some other things about Massachusetts statute. So you have a contract that's going to expire, which is your curbside contract A, on June 30 of 2021. There were some questions about how best to proceed, whether to put together a committee to try to deal with the issue. There were also some questions about, well, what is the gap, if you will. We sent out late this afternoon what the budget is for FY21. You have it under sanitation, not the entire $900,000+ sanitation budget is for the curbside. There is roughly $750,000, which is actually a little bit larger. I'm trying to find that now. My apologies. So you have a total budget for sanitation of $982,000 for this fiscal year. Some of that is top rate your brush dump, approximately $910,000. That is for the reuse and recycling pickup contracts A and B, that's line 5290. The Wheelabrator tipping fee, that's 5291. So there's $840,000, and then you have about $90,000 line 5300 under buying your pay-as-you-throw bags. So you've got 925 plus or minus as an expense for the program. We also gave you a sense of what the income has been over the past few years. You raised about $480,000 in fiscal 20 towards this $925,000 plus or minus expense. If you're about a third of the way through FY21, revenues are relatively robust. It is the summertime. You know, will they? I don't think they'll hit a straight 3 times, but you'll probably be around 525. So you're covering, you know, roughly 60% of your current costs via the income stream. Contracts for solid waste are not subject to bidding and procurement under Mass General Law, Chapter 30B. That's exception 30. When you look at that, you know, that's in the secondary memo we gave you. So what to do? Well, I guess that really becomes the question. I would respectfully suggest that if you want to look at some sort of long-term solution, let me back up, I'm sorry. Now, Wheelabrator has not enforced, to my knowledge, the put or pay provision in Worcester County. In instances in which the town simply went out of the business, or instances in which volumes dramatically reduced because of the adoption of a pay-as-you-throw program. I do believe, however, they would attempt to enforce the contract if you were to try to direct the waste elsewhere. You know, 6 months, 7 months is not a lot of lead time to try to put together a structural change in a program like this, especially when you have a contract with Wheelabrator that extends several years out into the future. You could get a price from Harvey for 1 year to buy yourself a little more time to kind of figure out what you want to do in the longer term. You could raise the bag fee a little bit. You have that memo. I think the last time it was changed was 3 years ago. You have a relatively low bag fee by comparison to communities in the county that do use this type of program. So I mean, that's the best I could lay out. Ms. DeFazio brought it up at, I think at the retreat. So we kind of did a bit of a dive. This is the best we were able to put together. Someone may have better institutional knowledge, but that's kind of where you are. And you're staring down this contract A expiration. And I need a sense of direction of what you would like us to, don't necessarily need it right tonight, but I need a sense of direction of how you would like to proceed, Mr. Chairman.
So I think there's a lot of information here. But let's see, I'm sorry, Mr. Fazio, you had a question, your hand up, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I brought this up, I think at our second goals meeting, as something that the board should be discussing, because I heard from our previous assistant town administrator on her way out that our bill for Harvey, our curbside budget, was going to go up about $450,000 when it expires on June 30th. And so I would say the first thing that I would recommend the board do is to confirm that with Harvey and see what we're looking at for the next fiscal year. And then from past experience, trash is a sensitive subject in Grafton. And I think that discussing what our options are and then getting some public input on, because if we can't, if the number is about $450,000 to increase a curbside program, then the question becomes, if we're no longer able to cut this cost by 60% with bag fees, do we get out of the trash business? And that's a question that, again, I think public input would be necessary. As far as Wheelabrator contract, which I believe, Carter, you said expires in 2026. I don't know what our current tipping fees are. I'm less concerned about that unless we decide to get out of the trash business. And my biggest concern is, what is our curbside cost going to increase once this contract is over? And if Harvey has already given the heads up that due to the recycling market, this is what we're looking at, do we have an option to get another contractor for recycling, or get rid of the recycling program and have that part be independent and we just collect trash? But that's a lot for us to bite off in a budget. So I just thought that it would be a good thing to discuss as early as possible.
Any other questions, comments? Carter?
The Wheelabrator expires in 2028. It's contract B with Harvey. And again, I haven't worked out perfectly the interrelationship between contract A and contract B.
I think I have some information on that. The contract, so contract A being Harvey, part of their contract is that they have to dump all of our trash at Wheelabrator. And we have a tipping fee. I'm going to say it's somewhere around $70 a ton.
$75 a ton?
75. Okay. I'm not looking at the sheet right now, so thank you. And that we, like you said, we sort of have a cap on how much we have to bring there too. So if we don't meet that cap, we're also paying Wheelabrator, but I think we make it every year. And then the third contract that we have with Waste Management, I think those are for dumpsters around the school for municipal and school buildings. So I don't think that would need to change in any way. Like I said, the alarming number comes from our curbside pickup.
Any other questions? So I think, I think we have to do an analysis to your point, Carter, and somehow have some sort of public forum and talk about this because it is going up exponentially. And we need to figure out, to your point, do we raise bag fees to cover the delta? That'll be significant. So in things being, I know we can't just snap our finger and have an analysis done. When do you think we could have some reasonable amount of information in a format that we could see that could allow us to, take next steps and share with the public, obviously, and inform them of these noticeable changes with our trash hauling?
Well, step one really is to reach out to Harvey and say, okay, your contract is expiring in 7 months. We would like to talk about what the costs would be that you want to be paid if we were to renew that for 1, 2, or 3 years, or even what we would call a 1 + 1 + 1. Because without that hard number, I don't know. I mean, we have a number that it might be, but until they reduce that to writing or we at least have that conversation, I just don't know what that number is. And so in terms of suggesting how do we backfill against that, I really would be guessing. Since it came up at the goals meeting, and we are looking at some short time here, rather than me just picking the phone up and calling them, I wanted to see where the board was, but before I proceeded to do that. I would think that I could be back in front of you with a more detailed discussion at your December workshop, if it's your desire to reach out to Harvey. If it's your desire to actually put the thing out to bid, that's a different issue. That's a package that takes some work, and it is exempt, which every procurement officer will jump up and down to tell you. If you wanted to put a committee together, I need a sense of direction, Mr. Chairman. I didn't feel, given my short time here and the discussion on it, I thought I should bring it to the board.
Yep. Any thoughts anyone have?
Mr. Chair, this is, as Doreen well knows, probably more of a public discussion, touchstone or third rail, whatever you want to call it, than even an override. Once we get into this, you're getting into the bags. Is it a drawstring? Is it a tie? What's the future of recycling? Is it actually cheaper to just incinerate the stuff? And there are not only local convenience implications about how the bags work, but also national policy implications about, how China is dealing with our recycling and where's that all going. That's huge. I don't envy the person who Doreen will be on the committee going forward. That's not it. But yeah, to me, if we can narrow the scope of what we're talking about here, and keep, my desire would be to keep the current program in place as long as possible and to the extent feasible. I think is where my head's at.
Okay. Anybody else? I'll put it out very simply, Carter. Let's do the analysis. Let's figure out how much it's going to cost. And to your point, we ask taxpayers, and it'd be a very sensitive topic. And we need to figure out that if this is a program that they want to keep, then we have to figure out a way to make it sustainable. The proposed increase that Mr. Fazio shared with us from previous assistant town administrator is concerning. We need to validate that number. We need to back that up, figure out what's driving that cost. And then what options do we have? So I think by the 8th, personally, I'd like to have this come back as another discussion item. But we have created we did talk about creating that committee a while back. Is this something we just kind of, let me ask the board, do we want to put this out to a subcommittee? If you ask me, I don't think there's enough time, but that's my opinion. Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough real time either, although to be frank, this is news that is not terribly surprising in that I think this is going to befall most Massachusetts communities. You know, recycling and waste disposal companies have they have the leverage. And if it's going to be more expensive for them to move waste to all the places that they've moved it before, China in particular, they're going to pass that cost along to the consumer, and here we are. So I'm not sure that we have time for that.
I would agree. Anyone else? Mr. Fazio?
I agree with that too. I think we tried back in, I don't know, April or May or June to put together a committee, and there really hasn't been much interest, and we have been very busy with other priorities. And, you know, I also wanted to ask the question to Carter, if you could remind me of the trash procurement process. Would we be allowed to maybe not go out to bid, but receive information from other local vendors as well, just to kind of get an idea? And maybe it's not even a quote, but just, you know, how are we trending beyond Harvey? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong too, we had a 5-year contract with Harvey, which is why it's remained the cost it has for the town, and that they are now sort of forewarning us that that price is going to change. But it would be nice to kind of know that, just confirm the trend overall from the other vendors that are used in the area, and we take it from there.
We'll do what we can. I'm very sensitive to this. I've introduced the pay-as-you-throw program in 2 communities. I've had effigies of myself stuffed upside down in garbage cans. I'm very sensitive to this. This and dogs will bring out more people to a public hearing than anything else. We'll do our very best to collect that area data, given the staff that we have. And we'll do our very best to be as complete as we can on this.
We do chickens, Carter. We do chickens. Chickens is
Oh.
Grafton. We do chickens. If you want to
Okay,
bring up trash, just marry it with chickens, and people will show up.
okay.
And,
Thank
and
you.
Carter, one more note too. I was back in, I think it was 2010, referred to as the bag lady or the trash lady for a solid 9 months in this town. So
Much nicer to be known as the lady who brings money.
All right. So we'll bring this back and get some more information and take take some action from there. Like I said, we would only have 6 months really to have something in place or some sort of alternative, but to be decided. Is there any other questions on that? No? Okay. I think that's all we have for tonight. Want to thank everyone for coming out. And before we go, I just also want to thank everybody for attending town meeting outside. It was a beautiful day on Saturday. It was a pleasant sight to see our former town moderator, Mr. Mead, come back for an encore presentation and for pulling through a consent agenda. I would like to review that process going forward. I think personally it'll work out really well, but I want to thank everyone for the logistics of putting this together. From Ms. Roy, Mr. Haddad for really assisting and really explaining what the consent agenda is. Mr. Terenzini, your leadership behind it as well, and putting the articles together. And I just want to thank Grafton Cable TV for coming out. I want to thank Cindy and Joanne in the TA's office for doing the logistics behind the scenes. I mean, these are things that happen to make town meeting happen that a lot of people don't realize. And last but not least, again, all of the poll workers who shifted from counting election ballots, who came and worked the polls and the registration at the desk there at town meeting as well, who sat outside, and it happened to just be a beautiful day to do so. So I want to thank them as well for all of their efforts. But before we go, does anyone else have anything that they want to add? If not, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Megan,
Motion made, seconded by roll call, please. Mr. Prisby,
yeah.
Mr. Fazio,
Alessio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often I.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Peter Carlson, aye.